Hey y'all, it's Rick here on Sunday evening. I hope that your weekend has been a good one. If you celebrated Mother's Day today, I hope that it was a wonderful celebration in whatever way you chose to do that. I'm feeling a little celebratory tonight. I thought I'd put on the tie-dye to be with you this evening. Let us begin, as we always begin, by recognizing that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of God and each other. And we also have Lucy the dog behind us there underneath the flag. So making a cameo with us. I wanted to build upon what I wrote about in today's post. And I wanted to actually talk about this in the post as I was writing it last night about this time. I ran out of space though, and I ran out of time. Not so much space, but time. Sometimes, when one is writing, you start with something and you write, and it ends up in a different place than you expected it when you started out. Kind of like some journeys, right? We start, we go, and we end up maybe somewhere we didn't expect. And that is very much what happened with the writing that I did for today. If you read that, you'll know that I talked about John's gospel and how John's gospel is unique because in John's gospel, in contrast to the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus goes to Jerusalem multiple times. As I wrote, and as you might be familiar with, in the synoptics, Matthew and Mark, Jesus is only in Jerusalem once. He's mostly in Galilee in the north, doing his ministry up there. There comes a turning point or a pivot point in the gospel, and he begins his journey to Jerusalem, where he will enter and go through what we would call Holy Week, and then die on the cross and be resurrected. Luke adds one visit, and that is the visit in the temple when Jesus was a boy. John, on the other hand, has multiple visits. I'm not sure exactly how many, but very early in John's gospel, like the very second chapter, Jesus is in Jerusalem, cleansing the temple, catching the attention of the Jewish leaders, and really beginning the movement against him that will culminate in his in the conspiracy between the Jewish leaders and the Roman leaders to execute him. So, what is significant about these visits in the way that John sets this up, and what is relevant to today's gospel, Sunday, as we are moving into and out of the fourth Sunday of Easter? What is unique about how John sets up these visits is almost always they coincide with a Jewish festival. And this one is no exception. Now, we might not be familiar with the names or the history of these Jewish festivals, but the hearers of this gospel in the Johannine, the John community, many scholars believe that they were probably based on evidence that we have within the text and also outside of the Gospel of John. There's evidence that these were probably a community of Jewish folks who were transitioning, if you will, into following Jesus, that they were going to the synagogue, they were practicing their Jewish faith, so they knew the holidays, and they were following the resurrected Christ and the apostles, especially the apostle John, whose name is given to John's gospel. And therefore, in John's gospel, it is significant that we have these Jewish holidays. So what Jewish holiday is it? Well, let me read to you the short reading that was the gospel, the liturgical gospel for today. And I'm going to read as I typically read or write from the indigenous translation. You've hopefully seen this translation. It's really quite amazing. I really enjoy reading it. I find it to be thought-provoking and expansive and just really interesting, in part because they use kind of like, instead of giving the names of the people, Jesus, the apostles, and so forth, they use meaning names that capture the meaning of those people. So I think that's a really pretty cool feature. You'll also see that there's some parenthetical. They add a little bit, the translator adds a little bit of context to the story to kind of help explain and also maybe help it flow a little bit better. So you'll see that comes up pretty early here in this translation. So this is from the 10th chapter of John, starting with verse 22. 2 moons had passed since the festival of shelters, and it was now time for the people to celebrate the feast of dedication in the village of peace, Jerusalem. And this is the commentary or the context. The festival was to remember the time when the Great Spirit's lodge was cleansed after it had been made ceremonially unclean by an evil ruler. Now, in this translation, the lodge is what would be the Jewish temple that we get in most other translations. It was winter, and Creator Sets Free, Jesus, was walking near the sacred lodge under the entryway named for the great chief stands in peace, Solomon. The tribal leaders came to him and said, "How long will you make us wait? If you are the chosen one, then tell us." "I already told you who I am," he said to them, "but you did not believe me. The things I do representing my Father speak the truth about me. As I told you before, you do not trust me because you are not my sheep. I know who my sheep are, for they know my voice and go where I lead them. My gift to them is the life of the world to come, full of beauty and harmony, and they will never fade away or come to a bad end. My Father gave them to me, and no one can take them from me, because no one is greater than my Father. My sheep are safe in his hands, for I and my Father are one." Now, I want to read one more verse that it was not part of the liturgical gospel today, but it is the very next verse, verse 31. It says, "The tribal leaders became furious and picked up stones to kill him." Jesus stands his ground and so forth. But nevertheless, Jesus says something there that really angers them. Well, what is it? John gives us a clue by the festival, the feast, the celebration that is going on. And again, the pattern is that Jesus goes to these festivals, says something that is in contrast or conflict with the festival initially, but is expanding it. That's what he's always doing here. He's always taking that Jewish celebration and somehow making it different and making it based upon his experience, who he is, and who he is in the Father. Now, needless to say, as it says in here, the tribal leaders, which is often, I think, very problematically translated in John's gospel as the Jews. Now, I always, whenever I read John's gospel or talk about it, I always talk about the Jews in air quotes, right? Because it's clear that he is referring to the Jewish leaders. So I like in this translation that the translator says it's the tribal leaders. To be clear, it's not the Jewish people, like, every single person, right? It is the leadership that is who is against Jesus. So what is this Feast of Dedication? Well, turning to a commentary, and this is one that was a one I really like. I'm glad I kept it from when I was in seminary. I had a wonderful class, probably one of my top 3 classes on just the Gospel of John. And we read this whole, I read this whole commentary, and it was pretty remarkable. So here is what it says about the dedication. It says, the dedication comes out of actually the Maccabees, and when the temple was defiled by I think it was the Greeks at that time, the Hellenists, the Greeks, the early Greeks. So it says, as well as recalling God's care during the Exodus, dedication also focused on the evidence of God's ongoing care in the restoration of the temple, where God dwelt among the chosen people. The temple was a visible sign of God's presence. Another element in the celebration of dedication not present at tabernacles, that's the Feast of Booths, which is what we would call today Sukkot. Another element in the celebration of dedication not present at tabernacles was the memory of the apostasy among the Jews that had led to the desecration and destruction of the temple. The Jews had blasphemed the Holy One of Israel and led others into idolatry. The feast of the dedication summoned the people to remain steadfast to the law of their God, and by doing so, proclaim never again. So it's interesting here. There's kind of two themes that come to play here. One is the celebration of the temple and how important that was for the Jewish people, that the temple is being God's presence. Well, Jesus is countering this. He's not saying that the temple is meaningless or unimportant. What he is saying is, and we get this elsewhere in John 2, is that the relationship he has with the Father is far, far greater than the temple, because the temple is ultimately a building representing God's presence or God's dwelling presence. But Jesus is saying, God is dwelling in me in this unique way. And the way to understand God and the way to recognize the Father is through the Son, is by following him, imitating him, and so forth. And they cry out when Jesus says this, that is a big part of what offends them, right? Because that's very blasphemous to in their mind, the Jewish leaders' mind, to really kind of downplay or kind of give a slight to the temple, and of course, for Jesus to say that he has this unique relationship. The other thing, though, is this idea of the shepherd, right? This is such a key foundational thought in the Old Testament. David, of course, was famously a shepherd, and Jacob was a shepherd, and all the way back to the beginning, we have Cain and Abel. One of the brothers was a shepherd, and so this idea of shepherdness or shepherdhood is a through line through the entire Bible. And Jesus has already talked in this particular chapter about being the good shepherd and the sheep knowing his voice. But now he's turning it on the Jewish leaders, saying, you're asking me this question about who I am. It's because you're not my sheep. You don't hear my voice because you have rejected this call. You're because of your, and this is a theme in John's gospel elsewhere, because of blindness and deafness, they are not recognizing who Jesus is. And therefore he points this out to them, which angers them and leads them to pick up the stones. So I think, again, this is very important in understanding John's gospel, this reading and another reading we're going to have the week after next, which is a different festival, but it's the same idea. Jesus comes, really kind of turns the festival inside out and enrages the Jewish leaders. So I want to start to conclude, keeping in mind this idea of the Good Shepherd. I want to conclude with just a little bit of the 23rd Psalm in a Native American interpretation. So I will just read the first few verses, and this will be our prayer that takes us out. The great Father above, a shepherd chief is. I am his, and with him I want not. He throws out to me a rope, and the name of the rope is love. And he draws me to where the grass is green and the water is not dangerous, and I eat and lie down and am satisfied. Sometimes my heart is very weak and falls down, but he lifts me up again and draws me into a good road. His name is Wonderful. Thank you all for listening. I hope your day today was wonderful. And in recognizing the wonder that all of our days are full of, may we recognize the God, the Creator, the more, who is wonderful itself, or wonderfulness. Thank you again for being here. Blessing and good. Be well.